Have you ever found yourself shaking a ketchup bottle, wondering why it's so stubborn at first but then flows perfectly? Or maybe you've thought about how a polymer melt can be stretched into a super thin fiber without breaking? Well, the answer to all of that lies in this hidden world of flow and deformation. Today, we're diving headfirst into the science that explains it all: polymer rheology. I love this quote from H.A. Barnes because it gets right to the point. Just because something is moving doesn't mean it's flowing. Rheology isn't about carrying a bucket of water. It's about what's happening inside the water, how the different layers are sliding past and deforming each other. That little distinction, that's everything.
So that begs the question, right? What are we really talking about when we say flow and deformation? To get a handle on that, we first need to learn the language of rheology.
And here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics, what rheology even is. Then we'll get into the fundamental concepts of stress and strain. After that, we'll explore how polymers are the rebels of the fluid world, with their non-Newtonian behavior and this wild idea of material memory. And finally, we'll see how we actually measure all this stuff in a lab.
Okay, let's jump right in. Section 1. What in the world is rheology?
At its core, rheology is the science that connects three key things: force, deformation, and time. It's all about precisely describing what happens to a material when you push or pull on it, and how its reaction might change over a few seconds or even a few hours. All right, now let's get into the vocabulary we need to talk about these things, like we know what we're doing. The two most important words you're going to hear are stress and strain. It's actually super simple. Think of it as cause and effect. Stress, that's our sigma here, is the force you apply. It's the cause. Strain, or gamma, is how much the material actually deforms in response. That's the effect. Simple as that.
Now, flow itself isn't just one thing. We can break it down into two main types. First, you've got shear flow. Just picture spreading honey on toast. The layers of honey are all sliding past one another. Then you've got extensional flow, which is all about stretching. Think about pulling a super long string of cheese off a slice of pizza. That's extensional flow.
Now, for a simple fluid like water, the difference between these two isn't a huge deal. But for polymers, it's a whole different ballgame. When you put a polymer under extensional flow, those long, tangled-up molecular chains are forced to uncoil and stretch out, and that creates a ton of resistance. This is something called the coil-stretch transition, and it can make the extensional viscosity literally thousands of times higher than the shear viscosity. It's a game changer for things like fiber spinning.
And that massive difference we just talked about, it's the perfect way to get into our next topic: how polymers basically throw the rulebook for simple fluids, or Newtonian fluids, right out the window.
See, a Newtonian fluid like water is predictable. Its viscosity is constant. Stir it slow, stir it fast, its resistance to flow doesn't change. But polymers are non-Newtonian. Their viscosity is a moving target. It completely changes depending on how fast you're trying to make them move. The most common way polymers misbehave is through something called shear thinning. Let's go back to that ketchup bottle. When it's just sitting there, all the long polymer chains inside are tangled up like a bowl of spaghetti. But when you shake it, when you apply shear, those chains start to untangle and line up in the direction of the flow. That makes it way easier for them to slide past each other, so the viscosity drops. The more you shear it, the thinner it gets.
And of course, we have math to describe all this. The power law model is kind of the go-to workhorse here. It has a little n value that tells you just how much a fluid thins or thickens. But for something like toothpaste or mayonnaise, you need something more, like the Herschel-Bulkley model. It adds what's called a yield stress. Basically, the material acts like a solid until you push it hard enough to get it flowing.
This leads us to what is, honestly, the most mind-bending property of polymers. They have a kind of memory. And this whole concept is called viscoelasticity. So what is viscoelasticity? It just means the material has a split personality. It's part solid and it's part liquid, all at the same time. When you deform it, some of that energy gets stored, like when you stretch a spring. That's its solid side wanting to snap back. But the rest of the energy just gets lost as heat, like when you stir a thick liquid. That's its viscous side. We actually measure the solid-like part with something called the storage modulus, or G'. You can think of G' as the springiness of the material. It tells you exactly how much energy it can store and then give back when you let go. And the liquid-like part? We measure that with the loss modulus, or G'. This is the viscous side of the personality. It represents all the energy that's just lost for good when the material flows and changes shape permanently.
To help visualize this, we often use something called the Maxwell model. Just imagine a spring, that's the elastic part, connected to a dashpot, which is basically a piston in a cylinder of thick oil. That's the viscous part. This simple little picture helps us understand how these two personalities work together to give a material its unique behavior.
Okay, so we've got all this amazing theory. But how do we get out of our heads and actually go into a lab to measure things like viscosity and G prime? In principle, the process is pretty straightforward. You take an instrument called a rheometer, and you use it to apply a really precise, controlled force or deformation to your sample. Then, you just sit back and measure exactly how the material responds. From that data, you can calculate all the cool properties we've been talking about.
Now, the secret to getting good data is using a very specific, well-defined geometry, like a cone and plate. Why? Because these setups give you a nice, uniform, calculable shear field. If you just stick a mixer in a bucket of goo, you have no clue what the shear rate is in different places. Your data would be a mess. The geometry is what makes the measurement meaningful.
Speaking of measurements, there's this one key number that's like a secret handshake for telling simple fluids and polymers apart. And that number is 3. For any simple Newtonian fluid, the Troughton ratio, which is just the extensional viscosity divided by the shear viscosity, is always exactly 3. But for polymers, because of that whole coil stretch thing, this ratio can just explode into the hundreds or even thousands. It's a fantastic way to see just how unique polymers are.
So after all that, why does this matter? Well, because rheology is literally everywhere. It's how we design the perfect texture and mouthfeel for foods. It's absolutely critical for controlling industrial processes like making plastics. It's used every day in quality control to make sure your paint or lotion has the exact same consistency every single time. And on a deeper level, it gives us a powerful window into the molecular world.
Now, this whole explainer was put together based on some of the foundational texts in the field.
If you want to take a deeper dive into anything we've touched on today, these are some fantastic places to start.
So I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. If a material has a memory, then it must also be able to forget, right? So how long does that take? And what can that rate of forgetting, what we call its relaxation time, tell us about what's actually going on with its molecules? That, my friends, is where the science gets really, really interesting.